My parents moved to this street when I was a kid in the 1990s. Back then, almost anybody who moved here could find housing that was safe and affordable. Over the last 25 years, though, a lot's changed. Rents have skyrocketed, and the cost of housing keeps going up and up and up. And right now, we have a humanitarian crisis on our streets in the Puget Sound, with thousands of Washingtonians experiencing homelessness every day, and thousands more on the brink of it. It didn't have to be this way. Rather than promoting competition and sustainable development, state and local governments have enacted overly restrictive zoning ordinances that make it harder to build dense, affordable housing in the neighborhoods that need it most. And rather than investing in lower and middle-income housing, the federal government has decreased its investment in housing over the last few decades, making it harder and harder for families in urban and rural areas to find housing, and for businesses to find housing for their workers. Home ownership is the primary way American families build wealth. But for decades, discriminatory lending practices have shut out millions of American families from the American dream. Before the Great Recession, weak regulators sat on their hands as the subprime mortgage crisis wiped out millions of families' wealth. And over the decades, discriminatory lending practices aimed at Black families have wiped and drained out wealth from minority communities. During my time as Congressman Heck's district director, he chaired a housing task force that looked into the reasons why our nation's housing shortage was affecting communities all over our countries, big, small, urban, rural. It's important for people in Washington, D.C. to have a nuanced understanding of the ins and outs of a complicated regional and federal issue like this. And in Congress, I'd hope to continue that work and find real solutions to our housing crisis for the whole nation and here for the Puget Sound. Because if there's one thing that everybody needs, it's a roof over their heads. One bill I'd support is Congressman Cedric Richmond's American Housing and Economic Mobility Act, which would make it easier and fairer for millions of Americans to rent or buy a home through three main mechanisms. One, leverage government funding to build up to 3.2 million new housing units for low and middle income families. Two, create incentives for local governments to repeal overly restrictive and eliminate unnecessary zoning regulations. And three, a targeted down payment program aimed at reversing the effects of years of discriminatory redline policies. To solve our nation's housing problem, we need problem solvers back in Washington, D.C. who understand the complexities of this issue, the contemporary trends and the historical context that brought us to this moment, and the role that state and local governments can play in being part of the solution. I'm ready to get back there to D.C. and get to work for the South Sound and deliver real results. Because for way too many families, the rent and the mortgage payments are too darn high.